I want to teach you guys how to tie the most common knots used in surgery, and I want to teach you guys the best possible knot tying technique so that you'll be a master at wound closure. My name is Dr. Jordan Kai Simmons, and I'm a head and neck surgery resident out of Los Angeles, California. Make sure you guys are watching the whole entire video so you get a comprehensive look at every single knot that we would throw in a common surgery. So we'll go ahead and start off with instrument ties. For the purpose of demonstration, we'll be using a dyed 2-ovicral suture on an SH needle. It's a pretty big needle. It's a pretty thick bore suture, so we can have a good view of the suture through the camera. Instrument ties first start by throwing the suture, and then this example, we'll just throw a skin suture, and then we'll leave approximately a half to a quarter inch of suture at the edge, and then we'll go ahead and initiate our instrument tie. So we'll want to place our needle drivers parallel to the incision line. We'll take the thread in the opposite hand and then wrap around the instrument, grab the free edge of the suture, clamp it, and then you'll want to pull that free edge to the opposite side so we can throw a square knot, as you can see here. In order to get this instrument tie to cinch down on the initial throw, we'll go ahead and throw a surgeon's knot. So that's not just one loop, but 2 loops, and then we'll go ahead and grab that free edge, pull it to the opposite side, and then now we have a nice secure knot. You can throw our next knot, and then we are on our way to good wound closure. So just to demonstrate one more time and in more detail, we'll put our needle drivers parallel to the incision line. It doesn't matter if the free edge of the suture is on the upper incision line or the lower one. It also doesn't matter if the wound is vertically coming toward us, which side the free edge is on. We'll still go ahead and place those needle drivers parallel to the incision line. It could be parallel in the horizontal or the vertical direction. It's all going to be the same when we're looping the suture over the needle drivers. So what does the loop look like? You can loop in 2 ways, but there is a proper way to loop the needle for an instrument tie. You want to throw the first loop over the needle drivers and then the second part of the loop under the needle drivers before you grab the free edge. This is going to allow you to have a square knot. Alternatively, you could loop under the needle driver first and then over from the opposite side before you grab the free edge. We don't have a square knot in this circumstance. The knot is a little bit looped, it's a little bit less stable. So we want to make sure that we go over the needle drivers first before going under them. And then we'll throw our instrument tie. The next technique we'll talk about is the two-handed tie. Two-handed knot ties are accomplished by taking each end of the suture in your hand, using your thumb and index finger to loop the opposite suture around and throw a tie before you cinch it down to the skin. The first step to do a two-handed tie is to grab the suture properly. Grab each end of the suture between your thumb and your index finger, like so, and then wrap the rest of your fingers underneath the suture as if you're holding reins in the tiniest horse. Step number 2 is going to be tucking our left thumb underneath the suture. So we can see here that the suture on the left hand is overlying the left thumb. The thumb is underneath the suture line. Step 3, we're going to take the suture from the right hand and go over the top of the thumb. So now we have the suture from the left hand and the right hand over the top of the thumb. Step 4, we're going to close our fingers and then dip our index finger through the loop that we just created. So you can see that there's a loop here. There's no twists or exits in the loop. If there was, that would just mean that we're going to have to cross our hands once we cinch that knot down. But now step 4, we have dunked our finger underneath the loop. It is now our index finger that is holding the loop up. We're going to take the suture from our right hand and place the line, the taut line, and the pad of the index finger. We're going to clamp the thumb over that newly placed right suture only, not both the right and the left suture, but just the right suture. So I'll show you that one more time. Step 4, we dunked our index finger underneath the loop. Now that our index finger is holding the loop, we're going to place the taut suture from the right hand in the left index finger. We're going to close our thumb over that right suture. And then step 5, we're going to dunk our thumb underneath that loop. So now the thumb is holding the loop again. Now we have that right suture that's gone through the loop with the thumb and the index finger. We're going to let go with our right hand and then grab the portion that went through the loop. So we have successfully tied a knot that we can now cinch down here, and if you notice, it is a square knot, so this knot will lay down and snug and cinch tightly. So we have a square knot that we can cinch tightly and then build upon. The next portion of the two-handed tie is actually the exact opposite of the first portion. So we go from step one position where we're holding the suture. We place our index finger under the suture, so the left-handed side, the suture's over our finger. And you'll notice here that I switched sides of the suture. In the first portion, I had the top portion of the suture in my right hand, and this facilitated the creation of a knot with no twists and turns. You'll notice if I started with the top portion of the suture in my left hand and we did the first portion and we made a loop, we would end up with an X in the line. That means we'll just have to cross our hands, kind of crossing over when we tie that knot down. Now, we're not actually going to do this in the operating room when we are going between the first portion and the second portion of the two-handed tie, but I'll show you guys how to reconcile that at the end. So again, with the second portion, we start with step one, index finger, thumb, index finger, thumb. Step two, we take our index finger under the suture line. Step three, we take the right-handed suture, pass it over the top of the index finger, and then we close, dunk under. We place the right suture on the tip of the thumb. We close it with the index finger. So now we can take this suture through the loop. We let go with the right hand and pick up the suture on the opposite side of the loop. And now we have the opportunity to throw a nice square knot here. So let's put this all together. We'll start with step one. We take the suture in either hand, thumb and index finger, grab the rest with the remaining fingers, put our thumb underneath the suture, put the right-handed suture over the thumb. Now we have created a loop with no X's or twists. We close the fingers under the loop, place the right suture, close the fingers under the loop, let go of the right suture, and then grab it on the opposite side, and then we can cinch that knot down. And we'll go on with our second portion. We put our index finger under the suture line, take the right-handed suture, loop it over the index finger, close with the thumb. Under the loop, we'll take the suture on the tip of the thumb, close, back on the other side of the loop, let go, and then re-grab on the opposite side, and then we'll go ahead and cinch down. And that's our two-handed tie. So we could just go ahead and go back and forth with this motion, and we can just do that back and forth as many times as we need to. A pro tip here is to be able to conserve your movements when you're throwing these sutures. So if you're doing the first portion or the second portion of the two-handed tie, make sure the direction that you're starting is opposite the direction that you end up pulling, so that you can go ahead and reload that next suture just by crossing your hand back and forth. Okay, so the motion kind of looks like this. We start with the thumb, loop, we pull opposite, go to the finger, loop, you pull opposite, go back to the thumb, loop, pull opposite, go to the finger, loop, pull opposite. And you can just go ahead and do that as many times as you need to. I recommend just repeating this motion so you kind of develop the muscle memory. So the one-handed tie is a little bit more technically challenging. The start of the one-handed tie is exactly the same as the two-handed tie. You will take each suture on either side of the wound between your thumb and index finger, wrap the rest of your fingers around the remaining portion of the suture. And note that whatever hand you're doing the one-handed tie with, so I'm right-handed, I'll be doing the one-handed tie with my right hand primarily. The left hand stays just like this. You will continue to grip the suture between your thumb and your index finger, and you won't let go. This is how you throw the one-handed tie, because all the work is being done with the right hand in my case. If you're left-handed, you can do the left-handed tie. It's the exact same scenario, but opposite. So if you can learn the right-handed tie, or by seeing the right-handed tie, you can do the left-handed tie. We start with step one. The suture is between our thumb and our index finger. We are wrapping the rest of our fingers around the suture. And there will be two directions that we throw the one-handed tie: the forehand direction and the backhand direction. That's what I call it. I'm a tennis player, so I call it a forehand and a backhand throw. We'll start with the forehand. So we're gripping the suture between the thumb and the index finger. We're going to stretch that suture out with the index finger and anchor the rest of the suture between the thumb and the side of the middle finger here. So That is to allow us to get the finger away from the rest of the hand so we can place that initial loop. We use the left hand to put the suture over the top of the finger here. Okay, so you can see that we have no loop. There's no twists or X's in our loop. It's a circular loop. And then what we're gonna do now, and you guys gotta pay close attention to this, we're going to try to pull the right-handed suture taut with the side of our thumb here so we can tuck our index finger underneath and then go over the top of that right-handed suture, okay? I'll show you that whole process again. All right, so starting from step 1, we have the suture between the index finger and the thumb. Step 2, we're going to stretch that suture out with the finger, hold the rest of the suture between the thumb and the side of the middle finger, and then we're going to take the left hand, loop it over the top of the finger so that both the right and the left suture are over the top of the index finger. Next, we're going to use the side of our thumb to make this right suture more taut, because we're going to need to take our index finger and then put it over the top of that suture, okay? So now instead of a loop, we have this little A shape, or this little guy. You can kind of make him dance if you want to. It's like a little dancing man here, dancing man, or the A shape. And so with this A shape, we're gonna take our index finger again and then grip the bottom of that A, or the cross in the A, and then you're gonna pull that right-handed suture through, and now we have our loop. If we pull parallel to the wound, we can throw a good square knot, okay? So that's the forehand motion of the one-handed tie. I'll show you in slow motion and then in full speed without any interruptions. So slide, hold, loop over the top, make it taut, loop over, pull through, and then pull parallel, all right? I'll show you again in fast motion. Okay. Just like that. So you guys can start to see how using a one-handed tie is very fast compared to the two-handed tie. Okay. And then one more time in slow motion. So again, stretch the needle out with the index finger, loop the left hand over the top, pull that suture taut with the thumb. We're going to, if you can kind of see this from the side, take the left-handed suture that you're gonna go underneath the right-handed suture with. So you have the left suture and the finger going underneath the right suture, then over the top. So it's this right suture that's on the bottom now, because this is the one that's going to create the loop. Since the left hand doesn't move, the left hand never lets go of the suture line. Dunk back under, grab it on the other side, pull parallel, square knot. And so we did the forehand motion. Now let's do the backhand motion. Backhand motion is a little bit different. So we're gonna start the same as step 1. We're going to chop the suture with our ring finger and our middle finger toward us. We're going to lay the left-handed suture over the top of the middle and ring finger. You're gonna take the middle finger, curl it over the right-handed suture, so now it's under the left. So you can see in my right hand here, the suture is now under the left side, okay? And then we close our fingers and then pull through to create a loop. You'll notice this loop here is actually crossed, and that's just by virtue of the way that I'm demonstrating here. In the operating room with this situation, you'd have to kind of cross your hand to make sure that you threw the knot square. But I'll show you guys how to avoid that when you're throwing both the forehand and the backhand motion. So let me show you this backhand motion one more time. Starting in the first step position, thumb and index finger grip, take your ring finger and your middle finger out, chop it toward you, put the suture over the top. So now we have this loop here. It won't be crossed once I show you guys how to put this all together, but it's crossed for this example. You're gonna take your middle finger. The left suture is over your middle finger right now, and the right suture isn't really touching your middle finger because you're holding it between your thumb and your index finger. But what you wanna do is tuck that left suture over the top of the right suture, because this is how we create our loop here. Okay, you can see the right suture. What I'm essentially doing is making a loop with the right suture by putting it underneath the left suture, okay? They're not attached right now, but when I tuck my middle finger over that right suture and then pull it through, we now have a knot here, okay? So let's put this all together, the forehand and the backhand motion. In this situation, since the suture away from me is in my right hand, the one that I'm tying the knot with, I'm gonna do the forehand motion first. And you can see why, because I can form that loop with no crosses in the middle, meaning that when I throw the knot, I can pull toward me and I don't have to cross my hands in an awkward direction. And then I can be ready for the backhand knot. Now we're in position already, almost automatically, for the backhand suture. So here is the fast motion. So do it again at half speed. Forehand, backhand, forehand, backhand, a little bit faster, forehand, backhand, forehand, backhand, and you guys can already see that there is an element of thread handling too. So if the thread's long enough, it kind of gets in your way, but you have to be able to quickly get it out of the way and then proceed with the knot tying. And that's how you throw a one-handed tie. The surgeon's knot is probably the most important knot that you can throw. This is the knot that will allow your suture to hold under conditions where there is increased tension. For example, when you're throwing sutures in a deep wound bed. So surgeon's knots are tied using the two-handed method primarily, but you can also tie surgeon's knots using the one-handed method. When we're doing a two-handed surgeon's knot, we're going to start with the first portion of the two-handed tie. We'll take our thumb, we'll loop the suture over the top of our thumb. We'll close our thumb and index finger in a circle. So we have a closed loop. We now have like interlocking rings. So here's the first loop made with the suture. Here's the second loop made with our thumb and index finger. We'll dunk our index finger under the loop. We'll place the right-handed suture on the tip of the left index finger, close that loop again, and then dunk the left thumb through the loop, so we are actually pulling the right suture through the loop that we've created with both sutures. We'll let go and grab it on the other side. And then instead of cinching this knot down and tying it to the skin, we're actually going to close our index finger to our thumb again, come back under the loop, place the suture again back on the tip of the index finger, close and pull it through the loop for a second time. And then at this point, we're going to cinch down on the skin. And now we have a beautifully closed wound. So this is half speed. We'll do our two-handed surgeon's knot. And make sure to always pull in the same plane as the skin. Don't pull up, pull in the same plane as the skin. And here we are, full speed, throwing a surgeon's knot. This is how quickly you do it in the operating room, okay? So I'll show you the difference between the single knot and the surgeon's knot. Compared to when I didn't throw a surgeon's knot, the tissue tended to start to gape back open. Now, just as a bonus, I'll show you guys how to do the one-handed surgeon's knot. This is a very complex maneuver. I'm not gonna go into much detail with this one just because, you don't really see people do this too often, but it is something that can be done. So the one-handed surgeon's knot essentially is you're throwing a forehand one-handed knot in the right hand and a backhand one-handed knot in the left hand. So you'll start in forehand position on the right side, backhand position on the left side. You will start to cross the right suture over the middle finger, but then you'll form this little X, and our index finger is right here at the lower crotch of that X shape. We're gonna curl our index finger over the left suture and then over the top of the right-handed suture, as you see here. So we start with our index finger in the lower crotch of that X shape, curl the index finger to grab the left suture and go over the top of the right suture, okay? While at the same time that we do this, we use our middle finger to curl over the top of the right suture and then go over the left suture, okay? So you use both fingers here. So I'll show you again in super slow motion, forehand right, backhand left. We have the X. We have our index finger at the lower crotch of the X. Curl the index finger over the left suture, now over the right suture. Middle finger from the left hand over the right suture, now over the left suture. Okay, so now we have loops in each finger. And so there is a lower loop, the lowermost loop that was initially the crotch of that X that you guys can see that my index finger is sort of pointing to. We're going to take each finger, middle finger and index finger, and pull those sutures through this loop that we've created, making sure to hold tightly onto the suture. And now we have a square surgeon's knot that you guys can see here, and we can cinch that down and the tissue will remain in place, just like magic. So I know that was a little bit complex, so I'll show you guys again in slow motion. So speeding it up just a little bit, we'll go half speed now. Okay, and here's full speed. Again, one more time, full speed. One-handed surgeon's knot. So in surgery, we throw air knots for several reasons. Sometimes we're placing a drain stitch or forming the base of a drain stitch, so we'll throw an air knot so we're not suturing the drain actually to the skin. Or we throw air knots to mark tissues that we're sending to pathology, or marking tissues that we plan on revisiting later in the surgery or for a second stage of surgery. So an air knot is generally not thrown over an actual wound. You just do it to the surface of the skin like so. So we'll just take a piece of skin that we're going to throw our air knot in. And for this example, I'm using a dyed monocryl suture. And so we'll throw a knot, either a one-handed or a two-handed knot, it doesn't really matter, but we'll throw our knot, and before we cinch it down to the skin, we're gonna leave just a little bit of space. So we're gonna leave a little tiny loop, approximately 1 centimeter in this case, and we're not gonna cinch it down to the skin. Instead, we're gonna throw the second portion of our knot and actually cinch over that first portion. That's why it's so critical to throw square knots. And in this particular situation, I'm using a monofilament suture, so it's a little bit slippery. So if I were to pull too tight, you can actually see the size of the loop decreasing. So I'm not gonna pull too tight initially because I don't want it to cinch all the way down to the skin. Pull up a bit on it. So instead, I'm just gonna throw more loops on top that I can progressively provide more tension to. So now I can pull tight and it doesn't cinch to the skin. So that's the air knot here. And this is a nice segue into our drain stitch. So we throw the air knot here, and this gives us the ability to now anchor our drain stitch into place. So I don't have a drain here to demonstrate, but instead I will use, what am I gonna use? I don't even know. So I don't actually have a drain for this demonstration. So instead, we're going to use this iPhone headphone adapter. This is just kind of a good approximation for the drain size. So now we've placed our drain over the top of our air knot. Now we want to throw another knot on top of the drain to kind of secure it into place. So now we have our drain secured. We don't need to throw a surgeon's knot here because this portion is not necessarily under tension. So the surgeon's knot is not really required. We'll just go ahead and throw 3 knots here. Our drain is now secured to the skin, but we want to make sure that if it moves, it doesn't come out. So here you can still see that there's just a little bit of movement that's allowed with this stitch. You can see that the drain is kind of able to slip through the knot. So in order to secure it into place, we'll actually wrap one end of the suture under the drain, and then the next end of the suture, we'll also wrap that under the drain so that we can throw another series of knots here. So, okay, each side is wrapped under the drain. We got to make sure that it's at the same plane as the previous knot. We'll go ahead and carefully throw our knot, cinch it down right on top of the previous knot. Cinch down, and then just make sure you cinch it down right on top of the previous knot. Go ahead and give it a nice pull within the plane of the wound. Don't pull up, pull in the plane of the wound, giving equal pull strength on either side so you're not jerking it on either side. And then just go ahead and throw a couple more. Can never be too secure. And then we'll round this out by doing this one final time. So we'll go back under the drain with the suture, back under with the other side, okay? And so we'll just throw a couple more knots, and you'll see why in just a second. Right on the edge of the drain, want to make sure that we get them all right in line with each other. You'll notice that some surgeons do the Roman sandal technique where the drain stitch kind of Roman sandals up the length of the drain. I tend not to do that. I find that to be a little bit less of a secure method. I like to throw them in the same plane as the previous knots. I find this to be more secure. The knots slip a little bit less often. And so we finally finish the tie, and then we can go ahead and cut. This doesn't need to be right down at the level of the knot. You could just leave a little bit of a tail. And now our drain is secure in place. It's not going anywhere. And we have it close to the skin, close to the wound. This is a really nice drain stitch. The patient will recover very well. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Make sure you guys watch the rest of the videos in this series. I promise you guys, if you watch and study all of the videos in this series, you will be a master at suturing. You're going to know vastly more about suturing and suture technique and knot tying technique than the average resident, I guarantee you. If you guys are not subscribed to my channel, make sure you subscribe right now to get more great content like this, as well as vlog and lifestyle content. And then also go ahead and give me a follow on Instagram if you guys want to see the daily inner workings of my residency. Thank you guys again so much for joining. I can't wait to see you in the next one.